It's good to see you. Welcome to another edition of Bible Shorts with Biblebob. I just came from teaching 7th and 8th graders debate, public speaking, and reflective writing, I like to call it, at Camp Verde United Christian School down the street. And I'm standing in front of a cannon. That's kind of like the obvious if you're watching online. If you're not, that's why I say it, so you know where I'm at. So I'm in front of looks like a Civil War cannon. And Fort Verde is down the street. A lot of history here. Civil War has a lot of history in our country. And today's topic is about euthanasia, mercy killing, assisted dying, dying with dignity, all kinds of terms that we hear. My wife had a dream that was kind of disturbing a few weeks back, and what she saw in the dream was storefronts that were like sanctuaries of the end of life. So basically, a storefront, like a common place that you could walk up to, just like the corner store or a shoe store or whatever store, and you could just go in and end your life. So, what happens in today's world, a lot of things that used to cause us a lot of anxiety, grief, consternation have now become commonplace, and we normalize them. And through the normalization process, we accept them sometimes without questioning. Oh, it's just normal. What can we do about it? That's just the way things are. But going to the Bible has a lot to say about euthanasia and end of life and things like that. So let me read from, which is really kind of cool. All right. So this is from Psalm 34, 11 to 18. And it says, "Come, my young friends, listen to me, and I will teach you to honor the Lord. Would you like to enjoy life? Do you want long life and happiness? Then keep from speaking evil and telling lies. Turn away from evil and do good. Strive for peace with all your heart. The Lord watches over the righteous, listens to their cries, but he opposes those who do evil, so that when they die, they are soon forgotten. The righteous call to the Lord, and he listens. He rescues them from all their troubles. The Lord is near to those who are discouraged. He saves those who have lost hope." So, in my life, being an old head, I've had experience with several end of life episodes. I've seen a young boy who was a 14-year-old that a gang took his life through a bullet in the head. I have seen my dad basically turn into what you might call a vegetable, meaning there was no brain activity, no nerve activity, and it was the end of life. And if you didn't keep him on machines, he could no longer live. So the decision was made by the family, myself included, to what we call pull the plug. Pulling the plug, if you're not familiar with it, means that you are taking away the mechanical means of life support. So my mom entered into hospice, which was really kind of a sweet thing, sweet moments. So mom was able to die in dignity at home. She had an oxygen bottle hooked up to her. She ate small things, maybe peaches, soft things, and sipped on some things. And she had congestive heart failure, and her body was given out. So the decision was made to ask hospice to help us out. And one of the really cool things, the family would take shifts at the final week. They expected it to take 5 to 7 days. I think it took 5. So mom, in the middle of the night, my wifey and I were taking a shift, and mom said she had to go to the bathroom. So the bathroom is maybe, I don't know, outside her bedroom door, like 3 feet across the hall into the bathroom. She goes in, my wife goes in with her. My wife says, well, she never went. She just thinks she wanted to talk. So now we've got this oxygen line that went from her bedroom all the way into the bathroom. And when she decided she had enough of the bathroom to go back to bed, she comes into the hallway. And I don't know exactly how it happened, but I picked up the oxygen line and took her arm. And all of a sudden, mom says, "Oh, let's dance." So there we are in the hallway, and we're dancing. And in my head, I'm thinking, you're near death and you're dancing. But that became my last dance with my mom, because when she got back into bed, she didn't last too long after that. And it was a peaceful release into the arms of Jesus, we like to call it. So I've had other experiences. I've known people that have taken their own lives. Um, and when you think of somebody taking their own life, let's say that somebody takes like a gun and they put a small hole and they die. Assisted suffering is what happens when somebody's left behind. Now, I get it, there's all kinds of reasons for people to be hopeless. But when you look in the Bible, God always has hope. And the Bible does talk against murder. So the purposeful taking of a life or facilitating the end of life to make it happen, you could say that you're kind of like intervening where God would want the natural process to take care of itself. So using a gun is a small thing, but the assisted suffering is like this cannon that I'm standing in front of. The impact is so huge. It's not just a little bullet, it's more like a cannonball of suffering for the people that are left behind. So even though somebody is no longer going through the suffering of their life, so it's a really hard thing to talk about. But in hopelessness, but here's one of the things that our students discovered as they started to define the euthanasia. Typical definition of euthanasia would say, well, it's the mercy killing of, an animal or a person that has a irreversible, incurable disease and they're going to die anyway. So you help them take their own life. But if you start to look at the multiple definitions of mercy killing and euthanasia, you'll find voluntary and involuntary, passive and unpassive, I think is the word. But the definitions are expanding to cover more areas. There was a story that we read about where a family, the person who took their own lives, wanted to spare the family the expense of keeping them alive because it would be a hardship for the family. When you put things in God's hands, He takes care of business. People are going to die. People are going to get incurable diseases. Those things are going to happen. But when we make dying so easy, then people walk out on life. They may be missing. Miracles happen every day, for that matter. I mean, I haven't even talked about miracles. I've seen them too. I've seen people that were sentenced to death years ago that are still alive today. So you have to really, really, really be careful. Yeah, I've told you my story about hospice. I've told you stories about people taking their own lives. I've told you stories about dad's end of life where the pulling of the plug was. I've witnessed several of those. So in the Bible, there's several instances of, let's say, attempted euthanasia. So the one, Saul in the Old Testament. Saul is the guy that was the first king because the Israelite people had rejected Samuel the judge and they wanted a king like everybody else, even though they got the warning that a king's going to tax you, conscript you, and everything else. So Saul does not follow God. And all of a sudden, he's going to die. So they go into battle and he gets shot by a bow and arrow, spear, what they used back then. And he says to his armor bearer, draw your sword and thrust it through me so that I die. Because if not, if you heard me hesitate, it's because a very loud car went by. If you don't kill me, Saul said to his armor bearer, that the enemy will come and do bad things to me. That's basically the paraphrase of what it says. The armor bearer refuses. He doesn't do it. So Saul commits suicide basically on his own sword. So he took matters into his own hands. There's another story about that same episode that a guy comes to King David. And David is waiting for news of the whole war. And what happens is this guy goes to David and says, Jonathan and Saul are dead. And David says, well, how do you know? He says, well, because I was there. Saul asked me to run him through with his sword to kill him, and I did. Here's his crown. Now, there's no evidence in print that this is what the guy's thoughts were, but I think studying the whole thing out, it appears this guy who was what was called an Amalekite outside the Israelites thought he could come and ingratiate himself to the king and maybe get appointed a good position or maybe get a reward by bringing the crown because he killed the king's enemy. But David, he ends up having his men kill the guy because he says in his mind he murdered Saul. What caused you to raise your hand against God's anointed? So that's two instances. One where a guy refused to do euthanasia, where Saul committed suicide. And in the second story, which probably didn't happen, but the scenario was the guy killed somebody to facilitate the death and he did do euthanasia. One more story. There was a guy named Abimelech, and Abimelech was a bad guy and he was doing bad things. So he's standing by the wall of a city, and a woman throws a millstone out the wall of like a castle, walled city. The millstone hits him in the head. So Abimelech, I guess, knows he's going to die. he tells his armor bearer, run me through with a sword so that I die, because otherwise people will say that I died at the hands of a woman. Even in his death, the guy was worried about how he would look. So he wasn't following after God. So that was a mercy killing. We don't know what happened to that armor bearer, but in the Bible, it's very clear. You don't kill people. If it's in war and things like that, we know war happens. But you have to be very careful that how you're approaching your end of life. So that's pretty much, I think, what we have here on the end of life. And when somebody's approaching the death of life, there is a way to die with dignity. Hospice seems to be a good option. I don't see anything about allowing somebody to take a natural death when you know they're going to die anyway. And it's a hard decision to make when you're pulling the plug, when you don't see any brainwave activity and you don't see anything in the quality of life that both the husband and wife had agreed that they would have what's called a DNR, or do not resuscitate. Do not keep mechanically alive, because that's not a very good life. So it's a hard subject. I appreciate your thoughts. If you have anybody, have any. So anyway, we're approaching Thanksgiving week, and it's a great week to have a time to be grateful for all the stuff you got. So I'm grateful you take the time to watch this, listen to this. And if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do so. And we're also about to launch something new. We did one of them so far with my good buddy Kai Tierney. We're doing a series called God Stories with Bible Bob. These are stories where God was at work so that we can give testimony in our gratitude for what he's done. All right. Thanks for your time. Go do something nice for somebody. Jesus loves you, so do we. See ya.